also goes by the playbook of the quantum particle, and that we are helping to create our reality. So if thoughts, in my view, if thoughts are things that affect other things, then what we have to do, and what I try to teach, is how to marshal that skill in order to affect reality and to affect your life.
Welcome, seekers of wisdom, to another mind and heart opening episode on Just Tap In. I'm your host, Emilio, and have you ever heard of the untold truth that our thoughts can have a miraculous effect not only on ourselves, but on other people? I'm thrilled to bring you this extraordinary conversation with the woman who has been called the Malcolm Gladwell of the new science. Lynne McTaggart is an award-winning journalist behind revolutionary seminal works known as The Field, The Intention Experiment, The Bond, and most recently, The Power of Eight. Lynne has been consistently voted as the world's top 100 spiritual leaders for her groundbreaking work with consciousness and the power of intention. Her achievements are fascinating, from receiving the 2020 Walden Award as a champion of change to architecting the world-famous Intention Experiment, a global laboratory involving thousands of readers around the world, testing the power of group thoughts to heal the world. And if you're a fan of thriller novels, listen to this. Lynne and her books were prominently featured in Dan Brown's book, The Lost Symbol, and Brown even created a character partly based on Lynne McTaggart. And most notably, Lynne's evidence and science-based teachings are showing that human consciousness is a substance outside the confines of the body, a highly ordered energy capable of changing the physical world. Recently, she began proving that small coherent groups of 8 have the power to create spontaneous change in others, where thousands of people have reported ecstatic, transcendent experiences, personal healings, and dramatic long-term life experiences. Praised by evolutionary leaders such as Wayne Dyer and Barbara Marx Hubbard, Lynne's legacy is to shift the paradigm of human potential and transmit century-old wisdom from spiritual masters into a whole new age. To spread this message to the masses, the most support that you can offer today is to drop a thumbs up on this video, share this with your community, and for more empowering conversations, you can subscribe to my channel where we'll be bringing weekly episodes. So, help me in welcoming the metaphysical rock star and Madonna of the quantum world, Lynne McTaggart. Lynne McTaggart, how are you? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you, Emilio.
You have no idea how excited I've been for this conversation. I feel like your work with the Power of Eight, Intention, really it's some of the work that I've had the most experiential knowledge into. Being part of healing circles and doing these things for a couple months now, and really diving deep into your work. I know we'll get into all these topics, but first I wanted to start off by acknowledging the significance of this new dawning of a new age that humanity is going into. And we really have these untapped human capacities that you're exploring in your work that not much of the mainstream knows about yet. So I wanted to ask you, what are these untapped human capacities that you've run into that you would like to share with people that might be in the dark about it?
Okay. Well, we're all born with this unique capacity to heal, to see beyond our senses, to forecast our lives. We have the ability to live above time, because we have created time, and it's really a false friend. In fact, it's a false entity. So we have these capacities, and I've been particularly focused on the power of thought and how thoughts are things that affect other things. And I've been exploring that now for many decades, and I've done experiments with that. I've researched about it. I've put people in large and small groups, and I am convinced now, and I certainly have the evidence for for it that we have the ability to heal ourselves, each other, the world, just with our thoughts.
Yes, I definitely have witnessed that as well. And one thing that came up for you, I know you ran into this almost by accident. You're an investigative journalist. You kind of stumbled upon this work because you were very curious about what makes up spiritual healing, what even is all that about, and you started diving into the work. But what you found was something groundbreaking that all the new scientists, this new wave of scientists, were beginning to discover. Even a couple decades ago, they were already getting into this work, and you called it the field. What is this underlying field that we can tap into, and what is it? What are the implications for humanity with the field?
Okay, well, we are told a certain scientific story, and even your generation is told a story of separate objects operating according to fixed laws in time and space. That's a scientific story that's been handed down from Isaac Newton more than 300 years ago. And so we go through life understanding that we're essentially separate and well-behaved objects. But the new science that I discovered when I started researching the field, which was in the late 90s, I discovered a number of scientists doing consciousness research and coming up with amazing evidence in their experimental work that didn't fit the prevailing paradigm. And what they discovered is rather than a collection of separate objects in space, we are all part of a giant quantum energy field. And we're not tapping into it. We are it, Emilio. I mean, all of our subatomic particles, and that's what we are when it gets right down to our nethermost aspect of our being. We are a vibrating packet of lots of energies, vibrating and trading energy with other packets of energy in all the things in all the world. So it's pretty impossible to say where I end and the rest of the world begins. And we know this. This isn't a fanciful New Age idea. This is hard physics. Scientists have known about the zero-point field since the advent of quantum physics. They've known that subatomic particles aren't a separate something like they're portrayed in chemistry class. They are, as I say, vibrating packets of energy that trade energy with other subatomic particles in an endless game of tennis. And in that game, a virtual particle gets created. And it's here and gone in the blink of an eye, less than the blink of an eye. Now, that's not very much energy when you look at one little tennis game. But if you add up all the tennis games happening with all subatomic particles and all the things in all the universe, you come up with this unfathomable amount of energy operating out there in empty space, like some supercharged backdrop. So there are two really important elements here. Number one, with this field, it gives us a mechanism by which we are all connected. And even Nature magazine, this super conservative scientific journal, has said reality is mental, that we are all creating and involved in creating this world. The other thing is subatomic particles are also waves, and they have an infinite capacity to store information. So when one subatomic particle bumps into another one, they collect each other's energy. And as I say, they have an near infinite capacity to store information. The Library of Congress of the US, which has every book ever written, could fit on a sugar cube if they were all quantum waves. Yeah. That's how energy dense, information dense it is. So what we have out there in empty space is essentially a Library of Congress of everything that ever was, of all information.
It's like kind of like a memory bank, right?
It is. It's a giant memory bank that we can access. So that's some of what's going on in terms of our extended human potential. Now, that only seems weird and fanciful if you accept the old scientific story. But if you understand that this new chapter is unfolding, then you see that we are embarking on an extraordinary new view of the world that describes us not as these sad little lonely things on a lonely planet in a lonely universe, but part of one giant, as I like to call it, intergalactic superorganism.
Yeah, yeah. And there's these two scientists that have been getting a lot of bad rap, Newton and Darwin, because they gave rise to these ideas that you're talking about. We're separate materialistic, objects, and we're separate from this field, and we have to compete to make our way in this world. And you actually mentioned something that was interesting in a previous interview, was that Newton, he was actually a mystic. He was so interested in exploring all these mystical topics. What about Newton's work in the mystical was not ever exposed in the mainstream scientific community?
No, because I think his ideas, and it's just like that with Darwin too. Darwin decided later in his life that animals and living things were not competing so much as cooperating. Those ideas really never saw the popular light of day. Same thing with Newton. His mystical ideas were considered too far-fetched. And, science proceeds essentially one funeral at a time. And those orthodox ideas that he discovered were very convenient for the advent of what was then moving on to what ultimately became the Industrial Revolution. And, his ideas are still great if you want to power a car or fly a plane, but they, fall very short if you want to try to describe what a human being is and what living systems are.
And speaking about this field, 0 point field, quantum field, I know other cultures had different names for it: prana, chi, life force. It's really cool to see the intersections between all different cultures. They're saying the same thing essentially, but they're using different terminology with it. And something that's very powerful, we had our interview with Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he talks a lot about the quantum field and how you can create from the field. When you're telling people that they can transform their life, they can change their life, how can you begin to teach them to incorporate this quantum field, this 0 point field, to begin changing, to begin making these quantum leaps in their reality?
Okay, well, you don't need to have a degree in physics or know a great deal about the quantum field to create, because you create in yourself. The point is, and I'll give you a little physics light to understand this. Reality out there isn't the reality that we think. Reality out there is a batch of unreconstructed stuff. So subatomic particles aren't an actual something. They're only a potential of something. So I like to describe it this way. Imagine an auditorium full of chairs. A quantum particle is one of those chairs, but in its superposition state, in other words, the state before it's become an actual something, it is every chair in that auditorium all at the same time. And what turns that possibility of something, which is what it is, into an actual something is the involvement of an observer. I mean, and this is true in scientific evidence, it's true in real life. We also have discovered, because scientists used to say, well, there's one science for the tiny and one science for that sticks and stones reality out there. But we're discovering that quantum effects also occur in the world at large, the world that we know, that sticks and stones reality. We know, for instance, that photosynthesis, one of the most important processes on Earth, the thing that gives us oxygen, that turns miraculously sunlight in through a plant into oxygen. That process is a quantum process. And we know many other aspects of life now. The biggest molecules in nature can be in a state of superposition. So what does all that mean? That means that the world out there also goes by the playbook of the quantum particle, and that we are helping to create our reality. So if thoughts, in my view, if thoughts are things that affect other things, then what we have to do, and what I try to teach, is how to marshal that skill in order to affect reality and to affect your life.
Yeah, we just had Dr. Dean Radin on the podcast. He was talking about how he was asking, he did an experiment asking for a gold-plated Mercedes. And, a couple of weeks went by, whatever the time was, and he received a toy gold-plated Mercedes instead. And he was telling us, like, with that story, is how clear your intention is what's going to affect, the result that you bring in. So if you have any examples in your life that you'd like to share about when you were super clear with an intention that created something in your outer world.
Well, I can tell you that with thousands of my students. I teach one of the big intention essentials that I teach in my course, Intention Essentials, or my masterclass, the Power of 8 Intention Masterclass, is one of the key things you must do is be specific. Most people, when they do intentions, will do something like, I want to be rich. And actually, that's not their actual intention. Just like Dean specified, he didn't specify the size. I want a real gold Mercedes, not a toy one. But most people, when they say I want to be rich, they don't really mean I want to be rich. They mean I want a new job. I don't want this job, or I want more time, free time to be with my children or grandchildren, or to explore a hobby. But I just don't want to be doing what I'm doing. So they need to tell the universe what they want, not some sort of just big general thing, or I want to win the lottery. And the other thing I usually say to students is, oh, so you need 23 million. And they say, well, no, I need 20,450 cents to buy a new car. And I said, well, do an intention for that. And invariably, when people are very specific, I've seen it over and over again, many, many times, people will get what they've asked for. So in numerous cases, let's say on the money front, I'm thinking of one of my students who had a 2,500 and some change overdraft. And she didn't know what to do about this. And she did an intention to clear it. And guess what happened? In a few weeks, she heard from a hotel, because she had overspent on a holiday that she was on a trip she had gone to the Far East. She hears from the hotel that she's overpaid because she had booked it in one way and they charged her in another way. And guess what came back? Just about the exact amount that she needed. I've seen that millions of times. One of the things that seems to accelerate this is getting off of yourself. So for my work, altruism plays a huge part. What I've found in many of my intention experiments, and also those are my big scientific experiments that I do with scientists, where I get my whole audience to intend for something, anything from purifying water in a specific area to making plants grow faster. We've done a lot of peace intention experiments and healing experiments. I find that we've had, out of the 40 we've done, we've had 36 that have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects, working with teams of scientists around the world. But what's also interesting, amazing, is the effect on the participants. About, let's say, the peace intention experiments, about 40% of the people who do those peace intention experiments experience some sort of healing. They get better. A condition they have is better or even cured. Their lives become more peaceful. Probably about half write in and say they're more in love with everyone they come in contact with, or they've made up with their not very nice boss or their estranged partner, or they're getting on better with their children. They feel more peace in their lives. So there's a fascinating rebound effect that keeps occurring. So what intention has so many gifts. But for me, the big thing has always been group intention, large and small. It's the thing that I've been really working on because I've found that seems to supersize intention. And as you know, I've been mostly experimenting recently with power of 8 groups, small groups of 8 or so of people, and having them send intention to a member of the group or even outside the group. And I've had 2 people get up out of their wheelchairs. I've had hundreds and thousands of people who have healed some aspect of their lives, not just their health, but also their relationships, their finances or career, their life purpose. They get better. And it has a lot to do with the dynamic of the group.
Yeah, and I've witnessed this also firsthand. I was in Cancun in February at one of Dr. Joe's retreats, and I came in the event like with a very closed heart. That was something that I was working on due to a relationship, a past business partnership, and it wasn't toward the last 3 days of the event where Joe runs these coherence healings, which is essentially doing sending intention to
Power
someone.
of 8 group.
Power of 8,
Yeah.
exactly. Power of 8.
Yeah.
And it's incredible because I witnessed someone get out of a wheelchair. And just by saying that, we might understand it intellectually, but the emotional feeling of seeing someone that you saw at the beginning of the event and they looked weak to their bones, they looked like there was no life force inside of them, to one of these Power of 8 healings, and now they're getting up and they look completely transformed. And I can't explain the emotion that brought me in the moment when I witnessed that. And it's truly miraculous. And I heard you say once, like, we're studying the science of the miraculous. This is what this work is all about. And I wanted to ask you, just taking a trip down like history lane, lots of different cultures have done healing circles. You mentioned Stonehenge was actually used for these purposes of healing. Jesus, when he was with his apostles, he was telling them, like, you need to pray in one accord, that was one translation in the Bible. But really what he was telling them, as you said, was getting them to a ecstatic state of prayer to where they were all synchronized and coherent. And that really shifts the field.
Absolutely. When I was trying to look for antecedents, Emilio, I was looking through indigenous cultures and other religions, like, and even people like the Rosicrucians, who had something close to what I was doing. In most cases, what I found was that they required a leader, a shaman. And that's not what I was discovering. And as you know, back in 2008, I was just experimenting. I thought one day I'd been seeing amazing effects with intention experiments. And I thought, well, I'll put people into a small group. I'll just play around with this at a workshop. And I didn't really expect anything to happen. But what happened when we started putting people into groups of 8 or so is they'd come back the next day and they'd say things like, I am usually terribly depressed and my depression has lifted, or I have terrible knee arthritis, but I'm walking normally today, or I have cataracts and I'm 80% better. That the first time we did it absolutely blew my mind. So I kept experimenting with it, working with it, looking at it. And what what I discovered when I was trying to find, okay, somebody must have thought of this before me, was looking at the Bible. And I found in the Acts, as you're talking about, Jesus's instructions to his apostles in setting up the new church. He talked with all of them about the whole idea of, as you say in the English translation, in the St. James Bible, it says with one accord. But actually, when you go back to the Hellenic Greek, he talked about praying homothumadon is the word. And that is much more like a musical term, which means essentially think of a Beethoven symphony coming to a thunderous finish. It means praying passionately and with one voice. And what he kept saying over and over again is pray in a small group like this, and you will heal and you will be healed. And so that to me seemed to be pretty potent instructions that were in some way similar to what I was witnessing, these spontaneous, amazing healings.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and well, Jesus, the man himself, was saying that you mentioned the word spontaneous, which I wanted to go deeper in that because a lot of us might not understand how, for example, I'm part of an authorized healing group here, the first youth authorized healing group. It's amazing. We're a group of over 60, now 70 actually, people under 25, 16 to 25, and we're getting into these healings. It's so beautiful to witness. One mother in the community told us that her son kind of got into a minor car accident which dislocated his shoulder. He was taken to the hospital, and she asked us if we could do an emergency healing on him. And a couple people got together, sent the intention, and right after 5 minutes after the healing, the mother called us and she said, the doctor came in and he looked at my son and his shoulder was popped right into place. He said, it's a miracle. We can't explain what happened. So what is this spontaneity of literally this is happening in no time, no space? Why are these healings so powerful and can become so spontaneous?
Okay. Well, I think there's numerous things, Emilio, that we can explain. Okay. Number one, there is the power of intention, no question. And all of my groups, I tell all of my groups, you just need to hold it for 10 minutes, sometimes less. My own Power of 8 group, if we have too many healings to do in that time, we do it in less than half the time. And they still work. But I usually tell students, let's do it for 10 minutes. And so there's the power of intention. Thoughts are things that affect other things. I've written about this, as you know, in my book, The Intention Experiment. All of the science of intention is huge. So you have that. You have the group effect. So remember, you're talking about healing groups. And that's what I see too. People supersizing their healing effects in a group. The late psychologist, the French psychologist, Emile Durkheim, always talked about a collective effervescence that happens in groups. We rev each other up when we have this extraordinary effect. And there was even a healing salon in France more recently, where they really talked about them being these magical crucible. So there's the group effect. But I think the big key piece here is altruism. The fact that when you're in a healing Power of 8 group, let's say they're 8, it doesn't have to be 8. It can be 6, it can be 12. It just works. Power of 8 group is just something. We were playing around with that title by accident, because I essentially, when I first did it, said, I don't know, maybe I'll put people in groups of 8 or so and have them send healing intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. And wham, they started healing, as I mentioned. So we called it the Power of 8. Yeah. But you can have 6.
8 in sacred geometry also creates the cube. It's the 8 sides.
Absolutely. I mean, it has so much loaded mythology around eight. So it is lovely. Eight is great.
Hmm.
But so there is that altruistic effect. When you're in a group, most of the time you're healing somebody else. And yet there are huge rebound effects that we see all the time. The senders get healed when they're sending as much as the healees. Many people who are stuck, I will usually say to them in my courses, get off of yourself. Do healing for someone else. And I think of a woman I did that with called Andy, who was divorced, who had two young children, who needed work. She had sold her gift store business and wasn't getting work. So I said, Andy, get off yourself. Do an intention for this young boy we had been asked to do intention for, who had tried to commit suicide after Luke, who jumped off a 40-foot structure onto hard ground and broke everything and had brain damage, nerve damage. He wasn't going to live, said the doctors. So I had Andy and the rest of my master class do intentions for Luke on successive Sundays while his stepfather kept a running commentary of what was going on. Now, Luke got healed in record time. I saw his parents a few years ago, and they showed me a picture of Luke. Now, the last picture I saw of him, he was in a wheelchair. And this picture of him was as a healthy 18, 19-year-old who's carrying on his life now. So that was pretty amazing, maybe down to us, maybe down to doctoring. But more amazing was what happened to Andy. Andy, the next week, got a call from somebody she didn't even know, offering her her dream job. And I see this tons of times. I see people who are stuck. As soon as they focus on somebody else, something in their life opens up. Invariably, it's the thing they were intending for. I've had people write, a woman called Lisa, who was stuck writing a book, wanted to do a book on healing trauma as a bodywork practitioner, couldn't get anywhere, needed somebody to help her edit, had gone through 3 editors, needed somebody to help her market, was getting nowhere. I said, Lisa, get off of yourself, focus on somebody else.
Yeah.
And the very next week, she bumps into, in a store, somebody she'd met before, didn't know much about her. Turns out the woman is a book coach, and she offers to help Lisa through the whole process. End of story. Lisa gets a best-selling book on Amazon. So we have many, many stories like that. So altruism, if you look at the science of altruism, it is extraordinary. It's a bulletproof vest. People who do things for other people live longer, happier, healthier lives. It was Aristotle who said, happiness is a process, not an end point. And the process that is most successful is living a life of service. So we were made to live lives of service and be happiest doing so. And as I say, all the science supports it. One final thing that is, I think, the big secret sauce here, which is oneness. Now, we talked about the field, and we talked about how we are all the field, but we don't get to experience that. We experience ourselves in separation.
Yeah.
We create time as separation. But when you're in a Power of 8 group, and we know this because we've done neuroscience studies of people who volunteers doing Power of 8 groups, and we discovered that almost instantly there is a lowering of certain parts of the brain that make us involved in separation, get us involved in separation. So, for instance, the parietal lobes. The illusion. So the parietal lobes, which help us navigate through space, they tell us this is me, this is not me. They are turned way down. Parts of the temporal lobes also involved in making us feel separate. They're dialed way down. And parts of the right frontal lobes involved in worry, doubt, negativity, those are dialed way down. When I did these studies with a team of neuroscientists, we believed we were going to have results almost identical to meditation. Those are meditation.
The alpha waves.
Yeah, the alpha waves and delta waves, even gamma waves. We got nothing of that. We got completely the opposite. What we had was a turning down of the parts of the brain that make us feel separate. So what it also looked like, these brainwave signatures were almost identical to work being done by the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Andrew Newberg, who studied Buddhist monks during ecstatic prayer and Sufi masters during chanting. And what we discovered was almost identical brainwave signatures to those. But here's the fascinating part of it. These were all masters. These were people who had spent hours of priming and years of study and disciplined practice. Ours were total novices, most of whom had never done anything like meditation. Nevertheless, almost immediately, they were transported into a state that was like somebody in a mystical reverie.
Yeah, it's like they get plugged in immediately when they're in a group to like this psychic internet where everyone gets like coherent. It's a weird explanation. It's a weird feeling. I know what you're headed towards, but it's yeah.
Absolutely. It's in a state of ecstatic oneness. It's like what Abraham Maslow, the psychologist, explained as a peak experience. But, the amazing part of it was these were, as I say, normally you need hours of priming, years of disciplined practice. These were total novices, and yet it was for them a fast track to the miraculous. And so I think that's the number one reason why small groups, power of 8 groups, are so powerful.
And another thing that you mentioned a little bit about this power of group is that right now, as I look at my generation, we're going through this isolation epidemic where I've never seen, especially in like high schools when everything had to go online. We felt very isolated. I looked at my sister, she's 5 years younger than me, and she was going through her junior year of high school, which is one of the most important years in that like social formation in our life. And, I just saw her doing her classes online, and, it felt like, this is not natural. And I went through the same thing. Like I was in college at that point, going through online courses, and I was reading through your book, The Field, and I saw this, it was like this discrepancy because, it said that isolation is a big cause of illness nowadays, but we were locked down for how long? So I started asking myself, they were putting us in a state of fear by being isolated from the group. And no wonder people kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker because we weren't taking into account this group, bond. The bonds that we share.
Absolutely. And Emilio, that was the whole subject of my book, The Bond, which was that if we aren't separate, if it's impossible to say where one thing ends and another thing begins. And that's true not only from our subatomic particles, but as I explored in the book, between every relationship we have, between the whole societies and even planets have an effect on us, and that is major, then how can we isolate ourselves? And belonging is probably the most important human attribute. I mean, we need to belong more than we need to eat or drink water.
Yes.
I found that one of the cruelest things you can do is to isolate somebody, ostracize them. But we need to belong, and groups if you belong to a group, you join a group next year. This is particularly the case with older people. If you belong to a group, so let's say you join a bowling group or a book club, you will literally have your chances of dying. That's how important belonging is. And we found that belonging groups protect us against depression, stroke, even the common cold. Heart attacks mostly have to do with people just being lonely. So yes, it was a cruel and unnecessary thing to isolate people to the degree they did over COVID. And I really felt for your generation. In fact, I set up a group just during when COVID hit called Connecting and Healing Through the Power of Eight, because I wanted people to create groups, and thousands did. I felt even a virtual group is really important. And that is one of the interesting things about a Power of Eight group, too. I mean, certainly in my classes, I put people into groups, particularly in my master class, but in all of the classes, I always put people into groups. And people are meeting virtually. I have people who are part of Power of Eight groups, and they've been meeting since 2013, and they've never physically met. Yeah. They just met online, and it still works. So that psychic internet works, whether or not you are in the same room or they are across, the other side of the universe. So that was a helpful element, but we do need physical contact. So I am so encouraging of young people to actually have sensations in person. Yeah. Because everything is so virtual now that cannot be a substitute. Really, really important.
Yeah. Lynn, we end every single podcast with a segment called the Final Trio. They're really rapid fire questions that you can answer in any way that you want. But before that, I wanted to let people know where they can find you and what you're most excited about right now, upcoming for you in the future.
Okay, thank you so much. You can find me on lynnmctaggart.com. And you can find all of my resources. I've got free stuff for people, how to set up a Power of Eight group. If you join my website, you get some free downloads and a video from me telling you how to do it. I'm really excited about all the level courses I'm doing right now. And I've got for people new to my work, level 1 class called Intention Essentials starting. I'm really excited about that. That'll be starting in about 5 weeks from this recording. I have my big year-long master class, which is level 2, where I'm very excited about helping people use intention in their daily life, in relationships, overcoming negativity and more. We are planning a great big intention experiment for 2013. I never announce it ahead of time, but I've been doing a lot of experimentation using intention, Power of Eight groups, and big intention experiments to overcome polarization. So I've done big intention experiments with Arabs and Israelis, and we've had a big love fest by the end. These are people who could barely speak to each other. More recently, we've been experimenting with Republicans and Democrats and finding that coming together with a great big altruistic intention experiment is a really amazing way to get the heart to leap across the fence.
Yeah. Yeah. And humanity's headed to this unity consciousness, no longer in this divisiveness and polarization. Lynn, the final trio, the first one that I have for you is based on the magazine that you started, What Doctors Don't Tell You. If you were given the chance to have a billboard in front of every hospital in the world that would be a scientific truth of what doctors don't tell you before patients walk in the door, what would you say? What would you tell them on that billboard?
Okay, a billboard. I have to make this really short then. Okay. Heal with food and supplements before drugs.
Yes. Nice. I love that. The second one, I know you teach the 13 the keys to intention mastery. If you were to leave us one key today for the next generation of leaders, how to master their intentions to create a new life and transform their world, what would that key be?
Okay, what I said before, don't be afraid to tell the universe exactly what you want. Don't think about it as, well, I'll leave it up to the universe to decide because something better could come along. That is essentially a kind of supplication. Don't be afraid to say it out loud, to say it in a group. And also make sure that when you are doing intention, it's not just about you. It's intending for someone else is just as powerful.
I love that. The third question, Lynn, if you were right now in a room or in a space with literally the next generation of leaders that are going to inherit this new paradigm, this new world, what would be your closing statement for them? Hopefully not a closing statement. I would love to have you back on as this progresses, your research progresses. But what would be your closing statement right now if you were in a room surrounded by the next generation of leaders?
I just couldn't. I would be so thrilled to do it because I would say that things have reached such a level of corruption, such a level of destruction, that we have to look at doing things in a completely new way based on the idea of unity, on the idea that we are very different from what we've been told. We need to adopt that scientific story in our lives. And one of the things that's really important is to move past the I win, you lose mentality. That pervasive idea is part of everything from education to it's the backbone of industry now. It has to be created on a different way. And one of the ways that I love the most is partnership. And by that, I mean creating companies, creating industries, creating energy companies where everybody is a stakeholder, not just a shareholder.
I love that so much. Lynn, you are truly changing the world. I love this conversation. Thank you for your courage. You're a pioneer. People young like me can look up to your work, and even just you being guided by your curiosity to follow this path. I feel like people can really tune into that curiosity within you, which has also been a huge seed in me starting this podcast and talking to these leaders like you. I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much, Lynn. Wishing you the best of love, the best of luck, and I hope to do this again sometime.
Great, Emilio. I'd love to do it again. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Much love.